Hello. Great. So first of all, thanks for attending today. My talk is, as you can see, on getting started with Test-Driven Laravel. Before I go any further, let me just prefix this with a bit of a statement. It's my first talk, so please excuse any mistakes, nerves, or jitters. But I'll do my best. So just a bit about me. I won't go into too much detail. I'm the lead developer at a company called Energy Aspects, based here in London. I've been there for around 2 years. Before that, my experience was contracting, consulting, that sort of thing. And I was based in Japan for 5 years, which was lots of fun. I've been a developer now with PHP for over 10 years. It's really what I love. It's what I do. Tinker around with JavaScript if I absolutely have to, but I would rather not. And when I'm not programming, I love flying, either just getting on a plane and just going to wherever around the world. And I'm practicing to get my pilot's license. So when I'm not coding, when I'm not flying, I'm a level 18 Pokemon trainer. And I don't know if any of you have hit like level 20 already, but it seems once you get to like level 15, 16, it's impossible to progress. And yeah, this is like my best friend. You see them all over London, right? Okay, so before I go any further, and I think these are sort of kind of like some obvious statements, and I think it all really applies to everyone in the room. But just some assumptions include, you've all got a fairly good grasp of object-oriented PHP. Some exposure to frameworks. You don't necessarily need to be using Symfony or Laravel or whatever else your tooling might be, but some exposure would be great. And some basic familiarity with automated testing. We'll start at some fairly basic level sort of theory, I suppose, and just build our way up from there. What we won't cover, though, is your typical tutorial stuff, setting up your dev environment, Composer, installing the framework, all of that nonsense, which there's 1,000 tutorials and blog posts to get you started. So we won't be doing any of that. What I will say is there are some great tools that are available, which I just want to highlight. Some of you are probably using them already. Some of you, these may be new. Things like Homestead, built on top of, utilizes Vagrant and VirtualBox behind the scenes. It's a really good tool for just getting your dev environment set up extremely rapidly. We had a new dev join just 2 days ago, and they had an Ubuntu box with PHP 7, Redis, Beanstalk, everything that a modern developer needs within sort of 2-3 minutes. And if you're OS X based, Valet is also a really good tool. Just Google these, there's loads of stuff, you'll find them immediately. They're pretty standard tools now in the Laravel ecosystem. And additionally, another great tool that leads me on to is just the documentation. What really got me hooked on Laravel rather than other frameworks is just the fact that so much care has gone into documenting the API so thoroughly. It's a really fluent, beautiful piece of code to work with, but Taylor, the author of the framework, has really spent a lot of time into going into some of the details of not just what the code does and how you get up and running, but certain best practices, how you would test applications, all of that good stuff. So we won't go into too much detail or at all on these, but I do advise you, just check out the documentation. It's really great, and anything that I don't cover, the docs will definitely touch on. Okay, so for those of you who are fairly new to the framework, let me just start by giving you a bit of a background. It's just celebrated, I think it was last week, its 5th birthday. So it's definitely in its maturity phase now. It's built on top of some core Symfony components, I think 7 or 8 of them. So it's fully tested, it's got a great infrastructure that supports it. And also key to the framework is it's extremely functional ORM. This makes it really powerful to scaffold an application, to get your idea off the ground very, very quickly. No longer do you have to worry about talking to your database or setting up doctrine or whatever. This is just set up for you out of the box and you're good to go. So that's an incredibly powerful aspect of the framework. And again, the documentation is phenomenal. It's really, really well documented. And I touched on this briefly with Homestead, but a key differentiator for Laravel when compared to certain other frameworks, or just going vanilla PHP, is the fact that it's got these great tools which all work together. For example, Homestead, which I touched on, to get your development environment just working with a few clicks of a button, and it's just done. So that's great for getting your ideas off the ground, setting up your local machine, your laptop or whatever. But then what about when you're going into a production environment? Well, sure, you can go into your Amazon Web Console, set up provision your service or provision your droplets or what have you if you're on DigitalOcean. But again, it's just an extra process which stops us from doing what we all enjoy and what we all feel really passionate about, which, I don't know about you, but that's coding, right? I mean, I don't want to mess around with the DevOps side of things. I don't want to set up servers and configure firewalls and think about all of that stuff. Forge makes that incredibly easy. Again, just create an account, put in your AWS credentials, and a few clicks of a button and your server set up. And again, it's provisioned with PHP 7, MySQL, Beanstalk, all of that great stuff, which otherwise you would probably have to spend like maybe, 2 hours, 3 hours, just to make sure it's all configured and working properly. And again, Voya as well, another tool just to get your version controlled project actually onto your Forge deployed servers. So again, the three sort of really work together hand in hand to get you from local dev to production super quickly. And actually, before I go any further, I just want to state that I'm not getting paid commission or anything. I genuinely just feel really passionate about some of these products. Forge and Envoy are commercial products, so I think you have to pay, it's like $5 or $10. It's not a great amount of money, but I definitely check them out. Another great point about the framework is the huge support community. And again, I think there's a website which some of you may have come across, Laracast. It's got, I think, 400 hours worth of video content, which if you're stuck on anything and you're a visual learner, it's just really great for figuring out a specific part of the framework without having to really like bash your head against the wall, which I'm sure some of you have got experience in with other frameworks. And it describes itself as the framework for web artisans. This is, again, something I feel really, really passionate about because I feel it's sort of had an impact on the way that I write code personally. I no longer write my tests like test index, for example, or process form, like really generic, really crappy labels that 6 months down the line, I'm just never going to remember what that code's actually for. And let me give you a concrete example. This is an example of a comment block that I just picked at random through, I think, one of the ORM classes. And you'll notice that each line of comment is exactly 3 characters fewer than the one that precedes it. And it's just that level of attention to detail, which is in every comment block throughout every class in the project that just follows the same sort of pattern. It really shows that so much time has been taken into curating a really beautiful and fluent API that we can all enjoy. And I think we spend so much more time reading our code rather than actually writing it. Sure, it should be a pleasure to read and it should be easy to comprehend. Okay, so let's get into the meat and gravy of my talk. Getting started with Test-Driven Laravel. So let me just do a bit of a basic sort of, put the question out there. What is TDD? So first of all, those of you who use TDD, just so I can gauge sort of, okay, so like 50% I'd say. All right, let's go over some very basics, but we'll kind of go through this pretty quickly. What is test-driven development? So we all write code and in some way verify that the code that we've written is correct, it does what we think it's supposed to do, and it meets the needs of the stakeholders who we're working for or working with. And whether that's writing, a login form or a registration form or something that sends email leads to a sales manager or whatever it might be, you could, sure, go into your application and physically type in, my name is Amo, okay, email address, my password, whatever, and verify manually that your form works, as you would expect. And that's a form of testing. But of course, it's quite laborious. It's not something that scales very well, as I'm sure you can appreciate. Sure, a simple blog application or something that, it's a simple marketing site that's going to run it's going to have a shelf life of, of a couple of months, perhaps it doesn't really matter so much, but for any sort of non-trivial application that's going to have a long shelf life and is of direct importance to the business, you're going to want to have something a little bit more robust to ensure that the code that you're writing is scalable. It's the right code for a start. So TDD, essentially, we can just think of it as fundamentally writing the test before we write any of the code. And inherently, what that allows us to do is use tests to drive the design of the code. So what I mean by that is rather than writing your code and then writing your tests, which is usually just a mirror of the code, you let the test itself drive the way that you write your API. And once you sort of get your head around that as an idea, as a methodology, it really sort of leads into the fact that TDD is a design activity. It's not really just about quality assurance. Sure, that's one of its main purposes, but I like to think of it, and the programmers that I tend to work with, we think of it as this design process that allows us to capture our requirements much more succinctly, much more accurately. And I believe it leads to a much higher quality of code as well. Touching on that point about requirements, it allows us to clarify our ideas about what this project is actually about, and therefore what should our code do. Again, if you're writing all this code up front and then your tests are asserting what your expectations are right at the end, well, how do you know at the end of your sprint or whatever schedule you're working on that you've built the right thing? You could go into a meeting with your boss or the person who's paying you for your contract piece, and you could have spat out completely something opposite to what they had in mind. By having your test written up front, specifically really clear functional or acceptance tests, you can almost eliminate that to a factor of 0. There would be no risk. And a point I've sort of touched on is writing your test first gives you very, very rapid feedback about your quality, and specifically about, again, design ideas. So the Golden Rule of Test-Driven Development, and this is a quote from a book, sort of my Bible, guiding object-oriented growing object-oriented software guided by tests, is to simply never write new functionality without first having a failing test. You might think, well, where do you draw the line? Can I write, a template, or can I write my roots, or whatever? Where, how clearly do I have to follow this? And I suppose that's actually a very valid question. I would say if it's of direct consequence to the business that you're working for or the environment that you're in, you would absolutely write a test first. Again, if it's something throwaway, sure, you can sort of bend the rules. It doesn't really matter too much. And this is a quote I just thought of just today, but TDD means that we only ever write code as a consequence of our tests. So what I mean by that is every code that you have has a purpose. Nothing's extra, nothing's fluff, or for every piece of every method in every object or in every class rather is there for a very specific purpose. And it's there because your test has told you that you need to put it there. Quick question, how many times have you heard this, or how many times have you felt you've had to say this, to your boss or your project lead or team lead? I'm sure you've probably experienced it either in your teams or whatever experience you sort of come from. We don't have time to write tests. Sure, I kind of get that when you're first starting off with TDD. The learning curve can be quite steep, and it does require a certain level of commitment to get past the first hurdle and really to start reaping the rewards of the methodology as a whole. But going back to what I've been talking about, well, TDD isn't just about asserting the quality of your code after the code has been written. It's about driving the design of that code in the first place. So if you're saying you don't have time to write tests, surely you're saying you don't have time to design the application, right? The two kind of go hand in hand, in my opinion. So I would sort of challenge you, and this might be a bit controversial, but the next time your manager, your team lead, the lead developer, or whoever you're sort of working with says, oh, we don't have time to write tests. Well, actually, first, if you've got a team lead that's saying we don't have time to write tests, you probably need a new team lead. But the next time somebody says we don't have time, just ask them the question, well, do we have time to design the application that we're trying to produce? Okay, so we know what testing is now. Let's put this into practice. So we need something to build. It's got to be kind of trivial because time constraints and what have you. So let's think of all of this in the context of just a simple web shop, an e-store. And we've had our meeting with our stakeholders. We know sort of kind of vaguely what we want to scaffold, the typical kind of stuff. Users can sign up. You can browse a catalog of products. You can see the details, add stuff to your cart, see the total, and then remove items from your cart as well. So you've got all of your requirements captured. Where to start? How do you apply TDD to this sort of process? You know what your project is. It's very concrete. It's not an abstract idea by any stretch of the imagination. But, it does pose a potential sticking point. And again, the way I like to think of this is, especially if I'm contracting, would be, well, what closely represents the idea that the stakeholder that I'm involved with, as in they've come to me with a very specific business case. They're very excited about their idea. Hey, Amo, I've got this great idea for a web shop. We're going to sell hot dogs. They're going to be the best hot dogs in the world. They're going to be like £5, but they're like 6 feet long and they're amazing. Okay, so you've got these great hot dogs. Fine, I get that. I'm excited about hot dogs. Sounds fantastic. Let's get working. Sprint 1. Okay, hey, Mr. Joe Blogs. Right, I've been really excited to work on your web shop. I really buy into your dream about selling the best hot dogs in the world. Amazing. Right, you can log in, you can register, and you can sign up for an account. Okay, fine, good work, but it's not really tied to what my business case is about. It's kind of the typical bootstrapping, boring stuff that you have to do with a project, but what I would like to do is kind of like wow the client a little more and show them something that represents their core business idea. So I think let's skip signing up for an account, browsing a catalog of products. Okay, we've got a hot dog with mustard, a hot dog with gherkins, a hot dog with chocolate spread. That sounds like a good idea. Again, we need to be able to see these are all the fantastic hot dogs that we're offering. See the details of a product. Well, it kind of sounds true to say that, okay, to see the details of a product, I need to be able to see what all the products are in the first place. Okay, we've identified a dependency. Great. Adding products to their cart. Again, I can't work on the cart part until I know what all the products are and I can navigate those and what have you. So you see the kind of logic, the process I'm going through. So I think what's our starting point? Probably makes sense. Users can browse a catalog of products. All right, so we know what the feature is. We're going to browse our hot dog selection. Where do we begin? Routes, controllers, views, models, and migrations. You've got all of these aspects of modern frameworks that you need to consider. And if you want to follow a test-driven development approach, it begs the question, well, what do I write first? What's my very, very first line of code? And that's a tricky one. And this is something that I really struggled with for quite some time. Because it's tricky. You want to follow the methodology kind of to a T, but you've got to start somewhere. Is it my route? I know that I want to go to /catalog to view all of the products, or I know I want my view to have this pink background and Comic Sans MS and whatever else. Do I start with that? I know I need a hot dog model or a product model and a cart model. Do I define all those up front? I would say, well, it kind of makes sense. We're doing TDD. Start with your tests. Ignore all the details. That's just a consequence. Remember, every line of code that we write is a direct consequence of a test that's already in place. So, okay, we know we're going to be testing. What kind of tests do we have available? We're further down the rabbit hole now. We know that we're going to be using this framework. We know we've got all these features. We know which feature, and we know we're not going to write any code. We want to start with the tests. But it gets even trickier because we've now realized that we've got acceptance tests, integration, and unit tests. Which one of these do I start with? Well, let's very, very briefly just touch on what the difference is between each of them. So acceptance tests are really good for almost liaising with your clients, I find. I would never write a test in a client meeting because that would just be quite painful, but I think it allows me to sort of ask the right questions. So what exactly is an acceptance test? It's an end-to-end documentation of what an end user would do as an action. Let me give you a very concrete example. I'm a guest user, and when I type in my email address and type in my password and hit login, I can see that I'm now logged in and I see my little icon in the corner. That's a great end-to-end acceptance test. Very, very clear, it's very specific, and we know exactly the goal that we're trying to achieve. We don't call any code in our internal API through, again, this is my opinion, we shouldn't call code directly from an acceptance test. It should be very high level, and the language that we use should be, I think, a successful acceptance test is one that you can almost read to a non-technical stakeholder and have a conversation about, just with day-to-day English or whatever your natural language is. Yeah. And it's written from the perspective of the end user. As in, I, as a person standing on this stage, can jump up and down if I want to. It's not user.object call whatever function. It's a lot more sort of behavioral. And it often describes or wraps an entire feature. And now, because these can call external services, they are the slowest of the tests. This is a sentence that I went to a workshop, I think it was just over a year ago, sometime last year, by a guy called Konstantin Sambushov. And I think that's kind of how he introduced himself. He was like, my name's Konstantin, don't worry about my surname. So I'm sure he won't mind me saying this. But this guy's really, really great at behavior-driven design. And this sentence really stuck into my mind. Although I don't necessarily use BDD as a methodology officially, I like to apply aspects of BDD to my day-to-day TDD methodology. But this question is just so powerful. Can you give me an example? I started the previous slide by saying I don't write my acceptance tests in my client meetings. But what I do ask them time and time again is, can you give me an example? And I find that it's so powerful because the conversation you'll find you're having with your clients or your boss or whoever else would be, okay, right, hey, Amo, I want this web shop to charge tax when you go to the checkout. Okay, do you want that to charge tax to every client? No, not always, but sometimes. Okay, can you give me an example? Sure, well, when it's a user from the UK, we've got to charge them VAT, add 20% onto their account. Sure, okay. And is that it? Is that the only use case? No, we've got a different scenario for customers in Europe. Okay, can you give me an example? And you see what I'm saying? So just this one question elicits so much functionality out of what started as we've got to charge tax on our accounts. So we've gone from, well, we've got to charge 20% across the board to, well, 20% here, but actually nothing if they've got a VAT number, and to international we don't charge anything ever. So really trying and bear that in mind. It's been really, really helpful for me. Okay, so on to our next type of tests, integration. And I'll just whiz through these so we can get into the more techie stuff. So these verify that objects behave as we expect. They kind of do the right thing. And the difference between these and an acceptance test is they do call internal code. As in, you can call specific methods. That's the whole point. And they can hit external services, talk to databases, send emails. Again, this is probably taboo to certain circles of automated testers, but hey, I like it. It works, and everyone's different, I suppose. And again, that kind of ties in with the point of the services. The speed of an integration test is directly relevant to, directly correlated rather to what sort of services you're calling or what have you. Sure, you can mock things, but then how do you really know that the right email is being sent to the right person, and so on? Okay, and then finally on to our last point of unit tests. you'll find you have, if you think of it as a triangle, you would have significantly more unit tests, generally speaking, than you would do an integration test, than you would do an acceptance test. And these test a single part of a class in its smallest possible unit in total isolation. Certain people think that, they can kind of, classes can talk to each other. I'm not too much of a fan of that, but again, take away from it whatever you like, and the point is more, use testing, integrate it into your workflow. Don't get too bogged down with the specifics, at least when starting out. It's always nice to aim for 100% code coverage, so you can test for all of, if you've got conditionals, if you like that sort of thing. And these things are fast, they're lightning fast. So a point I just touched on is testing jargon. What exactly is an acceptance test? Should my integration test talk to a database, or can it send an email? That sort of stuff. I think don't worry about it. It's way more important just to get your idea off the ground, have some sort of test suite in place, and once you're a bit more comfortable, then you can work out the details. But surely it's better to have some tests in place that, okay, you're categorizing a unit test as an integration or vice versa. Who cares? Okay, so what's the process? This is the process I generally follow, and I think it's widely accepted. Just begin by writing an acceptance test. So my previous example is, how would you sign up? Type in my username, type in my name rather, my email, set a password, hit save. That's kind of my acceptance test. When I do this, I can then see I'm logged in and I've got my icon in the corner. Okay, that's very top level. And again, think of this as a pyramid. Then we would break it down into the specifics of, well, okay, what's involved in that? I've got to create a user object. I've got to persist that to the database. I've got to do all sorts of these things, send a confirmation email. And that's when you get into the inner loop. For each part of those, you would write a failing test, again, to test each core component, make the test pass with the smallest amount of code that is necessary. It won't be the most elegant. It won't necessarily be production ready. But the goal is to get your tests what we call green. They're working and your test is happy. From that, your test is strong enough, in theory, depending on how well your test is written, your test is strong enough and your test is now returning green that you have the strength and confidence to refactor without affecting any other part of the system. And that's the process where you convert your immediate code, or let's get it done code, into production ready, we're ready to deploy. So, okay, our first test, the specifics. There are 3 parts to writing a test, which we can summarize as arranging, acting, and asserting. And generally I use specifically in all of my tests, given, when, then. So given I'm a guest user, when I type in my name and I type in a password and I provide my email address, then I can see I'm logged in, my icon's in the corner. Live coding time. This is going to be bad. Wish me luck. Yeah, so it's all great talking about this stuff, but let's sort of be brave and hope it all works. Okay. So remember, the context is our web shop. That's what we're going to be building, and we know that we've got our ID. We're not going to use it. We're going to start with the test. What was our first test? Our first test was we're going to display a catalog of products. So where to start? Okay, do I start with my root, my controller? No, let's just make a test. Okay, so PHP make test. So also, just to add a bit of context, I've already set up an instance of Laravel. My dev environment's all working. It's running Vagrant, as you can see, which is, Homestead, which is a box that Vagrant is using. It's pretty much a fresh instance of Laravel. Nothing really has been done to it. I've added a web layout just so things look a bit prettier. That might be cheating in the whole TDD thing, but ignore that. And I've set up my test environment. That's it. Everything else is vanilla. And there's a Git repository that accompanies this talk. So if you want, when you get back to your office or get home, you can check it out. I'll put the link on the last slide. And you can follow each step and sort of see how the trail sort of progresses. OK, so our first test, remember our feature is, I want to be able to see all of the products that we've got, all of the hot dogs, rather, that we've got on offer. OK, so it sounds to me that we need some sort of product catalog. So let's start with that. So product, okay. This is going to be, it's really hard to do because it's so low down. Okay, bear with me here. Okay, so PHP answer, make test, acceptance, product catalog test. So remember the first rule, you start with a failing acceptance test. And that's exactly what we're going to generate. You can just go ahead and write these classes yourself. That's fine. But Laravel adds all of these, in keeping with the whole beautiful code ethos, it adds all of these helpers, which, again, it sort of helps you focus just on the actual task in hand rather than file new, okay, scaffold, class name, and whatever, extend this, this other abstract class and so on. OK, so we've created our test, and let's have a look at this. So we've got our product catalog test. Let's just make that a bit bigger. Is that OK? Can you all see that all right? Is that? Yeah, cool. OK, so we've got a scaffolded test. Let's just get rid of this test example. We don't need that. That's just a bit of filler. I'm going to plug my mouse in to make this a bit easier. OK, so what Laravel offers out of the box is these 3 traits at the top. Without middleware, database migrations, and database transactions. Now, I mentioned this is a vanilla instance of Laravel, but what I've done is, behind the scenes, I've configured it to use just an in-memory SQL-like database. So I don't need to worry about connecting to a MySQL database and all that jazz. So I won't need transactions because it's all run in memory. So I know that I don't need that because after each test is torn down, the memory is automatically released and everything disappears. So I don't need transactions. What that would do is, if I was using a MySQL database, is it would just wrap everything in a transaction. So begin transaction, do whatever code I need to do, and then right at the end, just roll that back. So nothing actually hits your database, or is persisted to your database, rather. We've got a trait there called without middleware. You may have a certain test where you need to ensure that a user's authenticated or, I don't know, something of that nature. And you can enforce that through something called middleware. Now, when you're writing your tests, I personally think you should account for that, and you should have a specific test to ensure that that's adhered to. But just for whatever reason, if you don't want your middleware to apply, you can use this trait. But I know we don't need that, so let's get rid of that. What we do want is database migrations, because we know that we need to store stuff to a database up front. So let's just use that, and we'll import that. OK. So what's our first test going to be? Where do we start? Our feature is, when I go to the product catalog, I can see all of the products that are available. OK. So let's get cracking. Right. How do we write this? Perhaps 2-3 years ago, I might have written this as test. I know behind the scenes, this is probably, I'm going to have to create something called product catalog controller or something like that. And if I'm listing everything, it would hold true that I need to implement an index method to show everything. So I might have started with something like this, test index. Am I going to remember what test index means tomorrow, next week, next year? Possibly not. Maybe. Someone who definitely won't understand that next week is a new developer that joins the team, external contractors that we outsource the work to. So I think, let's be more specific. We can do much better than that. It displays all of the products in the catalog. OK, that's kind of clear, right? I don't think there's any chance that anyone's going to not understand what that does. Super clear. It's kind of verbose, but again, who cares? This is a test. We're not going to use this as part of our daily API. When we're actually writing our code, this is just our test, so we can be as verbose as we need it to be. Okay, so I've written this little snippet also, which it just automatically adds in given, when, then. So I've always got this guide of, okay, this is what my test absolutely has to include. There are cases where you don't use it, but for the most part, for an acceptance test, you would almost always use this. So given, this is where, remember, we're arranging our environment, we're arranging our universe. What's the state of this system when this test in isolation is going to be run? Well, it's displaying all the products in the catalog. So given, well, we need some products, right? Given there are, let's say, 15 products in the database, right? Okay. When I visit the product catalog, then I see all of the 15 products. Okay. Notice how specific I was. There's 15 products, not there are some products. Because then how do we assert we're showing all of them? So I'm being very, very specific. There's 15 products. When I visit the product catalog, and I could probably be a little bit more specific here. When I visit, I don't know, /catalog, if you wanted to do that, I kind of personally prefer that, just so I'm not tied too closely to my implementation. When I visit the product catalog, then I see all of the 15 products. Okay, right. So how am I going to write this test? Okay, given there are 15 products, so I need 15 products. Okay, so product equals, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's nonsense. Okay, Laravel makes this super easy. Purists would argue that, sure, you should probably use mockery to create a mock of your of the object that you're not directly testing. Okay, yeah, you could do that, but hey, let's just do this rapidly, because remember, we're just trying to get started with test-driven Laravel. So let's make use of the tooling that's built directly into the framework. And there's something called a model factory, which makes that incredibly easy. So there's this helper function called factory, and I know I want a product, okay, and I need to prefix this with app, because every class every model rather, that you create in Laravel by default lives within the app namespace. So that's configurable, but because this is vanilla, I just haven't bothered. Okay, so I want to create an app product, a product class. And I want to make 15 of those. Okay. So this, I'm sure, makes sense to all of you. Create 15 products from the factory. How readable is that? It's pretty awesome. And this is, again, it just ties into the ethos of what Laravel's all about. It's just so, it's so fluent and so readable that you can almost sort of guess what the API is going to be without even referring to the documentation. Okay, so when I visit the product catalog, okay, this visit, oh, that doesn't make sense. Catalogue. Okay. So again, look how readable that is. This visit catalog, see total products 15. And this is delegating to a bunch of helper functions within the test case, and there are loads of these amazing helper functions that are available, which allow you to quickly assert that something's visible on the screen, allows you to interact with forms, assert that a user's logged in, or all of this great stuff. But it's just so easy to write. It's so quick to get off the ground. Okay, so let's just quickly review. Create 15 products from the factory. When I visit the product catalog, then I see total products 15. I think we can probably do a little bit better on that. So let's make sure that it's actually the right products, just in case somehow something stuck into our database. So let's just make sure that it's actually the right product. Okay, I want to make sure I see each of the product names. Okay, so make the products, visit the page, I see the right number, and I actually see that it's this product's name, and there's 15 of them because I'm iterating over all of them at once. Okay, so we're ready to run our tests. Clearly, this is not going to go very well, but let's see what it spits out. My VM's been a little bit slow, so apologies for the delay in getting PHP unit running. Okay, so our first problem, unable to locate factory with name default app product. Okay, might seem a little bit daunting at first, but remember the first line of our test is create 15 product objects. And it doesn't know where the factory is that it's supposed to do that. Okay, great. Thank you, test. You've just told me what to do next. So let's go into our model factory, which, again, this is something that's just provided out of the box. I'm going to have to zoom in on everything that I open by the looks of it. And because a user model is, or a user class is provided out of the box, it's already scaffolded what a model factory would look like if I needed to scaffold a user object very, very quickly. So I'm just going to copy and paste this because it's most of the way there. So, okay, I know it's going to be a product, and it utilizes this library called Faker, which is amazing for getting kind of realistic-looking data into your application, rather than just copying and pasting lorem ipsum or mashing your keyboard and hoping for the best. Here in the context of name, it's going to give me a real human name. Same with an email, same with, there's a variety of different attributes, towns, cities, that sort of stuff. But okay, what's relevant for our product class? Okay, we know we don't need an email and password because that wouldn't make sense. So we probably need a description, right? Our product definitely we need to talk about it. So this has a function called sentence, or a magic function called sentence. So we've got a sentence that it's going to spit out. So our product now has a random name and a sentence. What else do we need? Well, we're selling this stuff, so we know that we need a price. And just for argument's sake and simplicity, I'm just going to use just a number. Of course, you probably wouldn't do this in a real scenario, but let's keep this simple. So a number between, let's say, £10 and £20. Okay, just integers, but that's fine. Okay, so we've got a price, and let's use an image. Okay, so Faker. So this is just going to give me a random image, and we want it 300 pixels wide by 200 tall, and it's going to be food because we're selling hot dogs. Okay, so we've got a random name, random description, random price, and a random image for our product. I think we're done with that. That's good enough to get us going. So let's run our test again. Okay, let's get rid of that. So before it got stuck because it said it didn't know where the model factory was to build our product. What's the next step? Okay, it's now saying, well, I don't know what product is. There's no class called product. Cool, all right, thanks for letting me know. Let's make our model. So PHP artisan, make model, product. Simple as that. Enter, and that's going to create our product. Okay, and let's just quickly look what that scaffolded for us. So it's pretty bare bones. There's nothing, sorry, just so you can see that. So there's not really much going on in there. But again, we're not going to write any code yet because our test hasn't told us to write anything. Okay, so we've solved this issue now. What's next? Oh, that's going to do the same thing. There we go. So we've got our factory now. We've got our model. What's it going to complain about now? Okay, this looks bad. This looks really bad. Don't worry, it's not. Let's just get through the huge stack trace, and it was something simple. There's no table product. Okay, that makes sense. It's an ORM, so every object is mapped to a record that we've got in our database, but we don't have a database table that it can talk to. So let's fix that. PHP artisan, make migration, create, what was it, products, table, create, products. Okay, so I'm just telling artisan, which is the built-in sort of console helper tool for Laravel, okay, I want a migration, but I can't be bothered to write the class myself. Just go ahead and do that for me, and it's going to get you probably 80% of the way there, and I'll just fill in the blanks. So create a products table, and the table name is going to be called products. Okay, so we've created that. Now let's just review what it came up with. Okay, so what this is saying is when I run this database migration, when I'm deploying this application or whenever I'm setting it up on my dev environment, is when I run the migration, it's going to create this table. It's going to add a primary key that's an auto integer of the name ID, and it's going to set 2 timestamps so I can track when it was created and when it was last updated. Pretty cool for like one line of code. Great. And when I reverse the migration, it's just going to drop the table. Didn't have to do anything. But we know from our model factory that we need to track our name, we need to track the description, price, and so on. So we've got table, string, name. Okay, and let's just do one of the price, description, and I think there was image. Oop. Ignore my messy desktop. Okay, so we've got that. Right, what's next? So again, we've done our model, we've done our migration now. So we're really close now to getting this to pass, right? Clearly not, because that's scary. Right, where to go next? Let's look through the top. Okay, caused by not found HTTP exception. If you go close to the top, it's going to tell us that, okay, it can't find this, it's a 404. So it looked really scary, but it's actually a very basic problem to solve. We haven't defined a route, so the application doesn't know what to do with this. Okay, so let's go to routes, and we've got one predefined, but we'll just quickly add catalog, and what's this going to be? As I'd assumed, it would be a catalog, product catalog controller. Okay. So if I run the test now, and I'm not going to, what do you think, let me just make this bigger, what do you think the next failure would be? There's no controller, exactly. So let's just go ahead. We'll skip the feedback loop, but in reality, if you're following this methodology, I really do encourage you. You might be able to second guess what's going to happen, and in this case, it's kind of obvious, but just to get into that mindset, it's really empowering just to follow it through. If only to sort of ingrain that into muscle memory. So let's quickly make our controller, PHP artisan, make controller, product, catalog, controller. Okay. Right, any guesses what the next error would be? No index, there we go. So let's quickly add that. Product, catalog, controller. Public function index, Okay, so this is where we actually start writing the code that we're trying to be, we've been trying to get this far. This is the point now where we're actually solving the problem for the business. And, again, remember you can use dependency injection to get the product model automatically injected so you can resolve that rather than using, static functions and all of that. But your goal here is to write the smallest amount of code to get the test to pass, because the test passing gives you the confidence to then later make those refactors. But the purpose of this is to rapidly scaffold and improve the design of your API. So let's do that. Product equals product, all super easy, and then we'll return a view. Let's just call it catalog.index, and we'll pass in the products, okay? Products. Right, okay. So again, if I were to run the test, what would be the next error? No view, exactly. So there's no command, unfortunately, like a really jazzy command just to build a view, but that kind of makes sense because it wouldn't know what the view should contain. But we've called this catalog .index. Okay, so index.blade.php, and let's just extend layouts. So this is the stuff that I set up behind the scenes just to make it look a little bit nicer. Section content. And again, if I had a little bit more time, I'd probably go into sort of the specifics of what this is for. Effectively, it's just a fancy way of using partials to repeat templates. So, okay, I want to have my product. What was it we're asserting? We're making sure that we have the right count. So total products. And we've got access now to this products variable, and on that we can run count. Remember, this isn't the best way of doing it, but it gets the test green. We do our refactor in the next stage. And then for each product as product, and for each, and let's just spit these out as a list. Product name. Okay. Right, so there's our template. What's going to happen if I run the tests? Wrong product count? Yeah. Why do you think that? Where did I typo? Products. There you go. Thank you. I was so confident. Okay, so now I fixed the typo. What do you think would happen if I run the tests? Any ideas? Dun, dun, dun. The suspense. It's green, great. Thank you. So I won't sort of show you in the browser because it looks awful, but wow, that's kind of impressive, right? Without opening our browser, we've built a product catalog that displays everything in our database, and we didn't have to verify it in the browser. We didn't have to make sure that the right words are being used and what have you. The test has given us the confidence to ensure that that is the case. And we can go on to then going into the next feature, which would be how do I view the details and add to the cart and so on. So sure, it was a really trivial example. There are two other features that I've prepared on the Git repository, which, if you really want to check that out, feel free to. But that's it. Thank you very much. That's it for me. Really out of time, so I'll hand over to Craig.
Any questions?
Any questions? No, very interesting point. So remember, the test had that use database migrations trait right at the top. So what that does is before each test, it hooks onto that, runs the migration, and then tears it all down. Cool.
What would be the approach given a legacy code base?
Good question. So this applies pretty much equally to legacy code as it does to a greenfield project. A number of the projects I work with are legacy. I tackle them feature by feature. So what I would do is, again, take the context of a user registration, your typical sort of entry point feature. I want to just get confident that the piece of code that I'm touching won't break as a result of how I'm refactoring it. And the only way I can do that is write some sort of acceptance test or an end-to-end test that verifies that what happens before I've done any modification is exactly the same as after I've tinkered around. So sure, I would just write an acceptance test for that feature, and there's lots of great tools that allow you to do that. You can actually import some of these modules and use them in legacy projects. And yeah, that's how I go about it. Any others? I'm sorry? To my... Oh, sure, yeah. So it's my first time presenting, so I didn't know whether I should upload these to what is it, slide deck, is the typical candidate. But sure, yeah, I can upload those just so you can access those. I'll put a post on the meetup event just so you've got a link to that.
Yeah, we'll tweet it as well. So we'll tweet the link.
Cool, awesome, thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, I sort of basically learned that when you persisted as well as a database, like your controller, buried the database.
Mm-hmm.
The database was empty, wasn't it?
So the question was, my test persisted the products to the database, but when my controller...
No, your test didn't persist in the database, that's what it was.
No, so if you look at the test rather, let me quickly bring that back up if I can. So in your test, in my test rather, the first line is the factory. So what this does behind the scenes is, oh, actually, sorry, I didn't touch on this, but you've got a method here called create, and what that will do is that will actually persist them to the database. Or you can use make, which just creates the instances without actually touching the database. So given the context, depending on what you want to do, you can use either create or make. Cool. Anything else? I'm sorry? The page itself? Sure. Oh God, this is going to be bad.
Is it pink with Comic Sans?
Not that bad, no. But it's there, yeah. And there's data here, so again, this goes against the whole idea of in-memory testing. There's only data there because I thought somebody might ask the question, so I added some data, so you can sort of see what it would look like. Cool.
I think maybe one more question.
You said maybe it makes sense to test against SQLite, but if you execute it on MySQL or Mongo or whatever database in production, I think you should try to reflect production environment as good as you can.
Yeah, really good point. So the point was, I'm testing in memory against SQLite, whereas my production environment may be MySQL or MongoDB or whatever else. And the point was that your test should actually reflect your production environment. I agree with you absolutely 100%, and that's exactly what I do. Because I utilize the power of database transactions, so our production servers are all MySQL based. My dev environment is also MySQL based. Because I use transactions, I could, if I wanted to, even hit the production database because I know it's going to roll back. But of course I don't because that'd be terrifying. But yes, I totally agree. I would never actually, in practice, test against SQLite when my production is MySQL. But that was configured just for the purposes of this tutorial.
Okay, I think that's about to wrap up.
Yeah, awesome.
So, big thank you to Amo.
Thank you.
Also, a big thank you to Justin and Lithium for the drinks. So, I don't know if anybody else wants to go to the pub. Is it the Christopher Hutton, Mark? I want to call it something else. Which is around the corner. So, if anyone wants to ask Amo, I don't know if you're going to come for a drink.
Yeah.
Any more questions you want to ask Amo? Buy him a pint and ask him. So, thank you very much for coming, and I will see you next month.